Elections as a clerk, and among the clerks, did you get a sense that there was a collegiality among the clerks, or were you pretty much confined to the clerk, your co-clerks, not potential?
Yeah,
co-clerks?
no, there definitely was a collegiality among the clerks. It was a little dampened by this rule, which was, I tried to make clear this morning, was very special, very different at other times. But the clerks would normally have lunch together, and the justices came down in turn to have lunch with the clerks, as a guest, and give a talk or something like that, or answer questions. No, I think there was very collegial relation among the law clerks, more in some cases than in others. That is, sometimes it would depend on what sort of personal connections. I mean, if two clerks were married, they would have more connection than if one is married and one is single. I think both the Pollocks and the Fassets were married at the time they clerked there, so they had some natural interaction.
Previously, I've talked to Earl Pollock about Chief Justice Warren and relationships with some of the justices, and he talked about how interested he would be to know your reaction of how Felix Frankfurter sort of, as he worked the clerks, inevitably worked the justices also. What was your observation of?
Well, I think he was tremendously thrilled when Warren came in, and since Warren hadn't had any judicial experience, or indeed any court experience, I think he, being the eternal teacher, was trying to take on this new student. And I think for a while it was a very mellifluous relationship. I think maybe, I don't know how Warren felt, but he may have felt maybe I have something to learn from Frankfurter, but Frankfurter really was not very sensitive in dealing with people. That is, I don't think he was aware that at some point there was a danger that this would turn into a problem that the chief obviously initially, and my impression was the chief initially was quite willing to be tutored by Frankfurter, to put it crudely, but as time went along, I think, I don't know whether Frankfurter regarded him with sufficient respect and awe and regard to change the relationship to a companion equals, or maybe even non-equals, and of course Warren was the superior. Mm-hmm. So I have a feeling the relationship soured towards the end of the year, and certainly by the next year, as Warren asserted his independence, as he well ought to.
Was he also, other justices obviously were competing for Warren's attention as well? And
yeah, probably not quite as ambitiously as Frankfurter.
You had a chance to observe some of the other justices, and specifically Justice Jackson. Was there, before you come down to Washington, did you have a sense of him, Jackson, as a justice? Was there a reputation?
Well, I think, again, this is one of these things where it's very hard to separate what you knew then from what you now know and are projecting backwards. I think Jackson was very highly regarded in law school as a very creative judge, and particularly because his writing was so stellar. I don't think I knew a lot about him, but then learned more about him because he and Frankfurter were sort of soulmates. And Frank Jackson would come into our office often, and we'd go into Barrett Prettyman's office. So it was everything I learned down there supported the high regard I had for Jackson before.
Any particular anecdote or two that you recall?
Well, I just remember the one I mentioned, this famous phrase of his, if the law clerks got a little too uppity, he would say, remember, you weren't confirmed by Congress.
This is in what setting?
Well, I can't remember what the setting was. It could be any kind of, it could be an interchange between Jackson and his law clerks, and the law clerk saying, well, I wouldn't do this, or something like that. You could imagine this comeback, yeah, but you weren't confirmed by the Senate, and I'm the justice, not you. That was the context. I can't remember the specific occasion. And I can't remember whether it was with his own law clerk or with some other law clerk who was talking with him and would say very boldly, well, I wouldn't say what you've said here, or something. You could see how that would sort of open the subject up.
You were born where?
Stuttgart, Germany.
When?
When?
Yeah.
1927.
So you have a story here that probably hasn't been asked. I mean, this is Nazi Germany time period. When did you leave?
38.
38. What were the circumstances?
Circumstances were that on Crystal Night, my father was interned, and my mother, who had thought Nazism would blow over in due course, got really alarmed. And fortunately, my father had a brother in England who could sponsor us to go to England while we were waiting for our visas to go to the United States, which might have taken 2 or 3 more years. So we all went seriatim to England. I went as an 11-year-old with another young boy, ourselves on the train and boat to England via Holland. And then my parents and my brother and grandmother went in February 39, and my parents shortly thereafter. We all went to England. Mm-hmm. And then were there for about a year and a half, came to the United States in October 1940.
Did you follow the activities at Nuremberg?
Not really, no. Not close enough in this setting here,
Was it even a discussion point? You would have been, let's see, at the time. The war's over. I mean, it's
when was this? In what?
45.
45. I guess I was in Harvard College.
Mm-hmm. When was your Army service?
The Army service was from the February 46 to March 47.
And where were you in the Army?
This is a good one. The U.S. Military Academy Band in West Point.
Okay.
Because I was drafted, but then was was classified as military occupational specialty 437 flute and piccolo, and got into a 268th Army Ground Force Band in Alabama, and then a guy came around auditioning people for the West Point Band, which is not run by cadets, it's by regular Army people, at least it was at that time. And so I got accepted in the audition and went to West Point. And then soon after, they had bought an expensive uniform for me. After one season of fall football games, the order came out from the Defense Department that anybody who had dropped out of college in the middle of college and had a year of service could go back, could get discharged to go back to school. And so that's why I was only in over a little bit over a year.
Okay. Okay. That is a good one. That is the Nuremberg period.
Well, that
Summer
could.
of 45 through summer of 46.
Well, that could explain why I was not focused. I certainly wasn't in law school then.
Right.
Yeah, and, I don't know that the Nuremberg trial was a major subject of conversation in the U.S. Military Academy band. I don't even know whether it was at the U.S. Military Academy.
You may not have been.
Was there anyone among your teachers at law school who was particularly a Jackson person?
Well, the only one I think of that Greg knows about, Ben Kaplan, because...
Ben was one of your teachers?
Mhm.
Okay. And
Yes,
he had been
and
at Nuremberg.
Pardon?
He had been at Nuremberg.
He had been at
for
Nuremberg,
the first
yeah.
half, basically.
Yes, he said the other day, not the critical part, but I don't know quite what that means.
Okay.
No, he would be a good person to chase after,
Yeah.
because he's...
John has talked to him,
Uh-huh.
and as you know, we came very close. We will do it in this summer here.
Yeah, I mean, he probably be hard for him to travel. You have to come to him.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And we'll do that.
What about Paul Freund? Was he at Harvard while you were a student?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
He had
yeah.
worked with Jackson.
In the SG's
SG's
office.
office.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I was very close to Paul Freund, or I shouldn't say very close, but close. I never heard him talk about Jackson, but, you know, that's sort of expectable.
And I think Henry Hart had also been in the Justice
Uh-huh.
Department.
In the Justice Department, with Jackson?
With Jackson.
That's sort of news to me. Huh.
But I don't know, that it wasn't the same relationship. Jackson and Freund was quite close. Freund actually did a fair amount of work with Jackson on Jackson's book, The Struggle for Judicial Supremacy, which was published in 41 while Jackson was AG. And I think Freund was still in the SG's office.
That's about the court
It's about
packing
court
plan,
packing.
yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Jackson Frankfurter, as a friendship, relationship.
Well, I mean, I don't know much specifics. Just one would, I think anybody who clerked for Frankfurter was aware that there was a close relationship between those two, at times of non-agreement, but great respect for each other. And
Was that Felix's closest?
I would say so, yeah, certainly our year, yes.
Okay. And did you have an impression of whether it was Jackson's closest?
That I don't know. I don't really know.
Did you have any sense of Jackson Black or Jackson Douglas as relationships during your time as a clerk?
Well, of course, no, I didn't, but I mean, they seem to me horses of a different color. You probably know Frankfurter didn't have good relations with Black and Douglas, so somehow I'm assuming that the same thing would apply to Jackson, but that's...
And Jackson had a very public blow-up with Black in 46.
What was that about?
About a lot of things. Most immediately, it was about Truman picking Vinson for the vacancy of Chief Justice, supposedly because Black and Douglas had persuaded Truman not to pick Jackson. I think, at least with Black, the dust had settled somewhat by 53.
When Vincent dies, who were the other candidates, and among the clerks, who were some of the other names tossed around?
Well, you know, I have absolutely no recollection of that. Maybe we were all less involved in politics and so on. There must have been a lot of talk, and of course the whole process was very short. Warren was named on September 30th, So that's only 22 days after Vincent died. I don't remember any specific person that was being talked about. I know, what wisdom do you have there?
I wish I had wisdom, but I know that even at that time, there was some modest suggestion of Jackson.
Oh, his name is in play quite a bit.
Uh-huh.
As is Reed's. Reed is the senior
Associate Justice.
associate justice, and it would have been a bipartisan kind of choice for Ike to elevate a Roosevelt justice.
What about Brownell? Was he?
Not really.
Because he was too new.
He was too new as Attorney General.
Yeah.
I mean, he was clearly running the selection process.
Well, now who was the Solicitor General then?
Sobolov.
Was I don't think he quite had them.
No, and it's over and done and pointing toward Warren within 2 weeks. Brownell makes a cross-country flight, meets on a Sunday morning with Warren at an Army base in California. It basically gets leaked that he's meeting with Warren. And, within a matter of days, the selection is done.
So it was all under considerable pressure.
Right.
I think Eisenhower either was persuaded or felt himself there ought to be a quick appointment.
Right. It was that first Monday deadline, I think.
Yeah.
Was it controversial to make a recess appointment?
Well, I was a little surprised to see that mentioned. I hadn't realized there was a recess appointment. I mean, the Congress was in recess on September 30th?
Evidently,
Yeah, huh.
yes.
So then he made a new appointment after January?
Yes, I believe.
Huh.
I
No,
believe
that's
it was January, but I
that's
think he
news.
actually sent it to the Senate in September or early October. And 53 would not have been the end of a Congress.
Right.
So I'm not sure. I think it was just one appointment, a recess appointment and a nomination, which wasn't confirmed
Oh, I
until
see.
March 8th of 54.
Right.
Did you stay in touch with Frankfurter after your...
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. I mean, that was sort of typical of the kind of parent relationship that I mentioned, that he would send you these notes on your anniversary, or somebody said something, he would rip it off and send it to you, and sort of constant communication.
Did he?
And then we had these almost annual dinners of all the law clerks.
Did he try and supervise your scholarship or steer your agenda at all as you?
Well, now let's see. See, I didn't go into teaching till '59, and then he died in '64. He had a stroke, or he resigned, I guess, in '62. So there was I came to start teaching in '59. Didn't start writing until about '61, so I don't think we meshed there.
Do you know anything about the Kurland effort to write Jackson's biography?
Never heard about it. Huh.
Look in Richard Kluger's footnotes. All of his access to Jackson's papers was courtesy of William Jackson, the justice's son, and Jackson's biographer, Phil Kurland. That's how it's described. Because Kurland, for 20 or so years, had the paper.
This is Philip Kurland? How did Jackson pick him as
He
the...
did. Felix did. Jackson was dead. And it's of that generation with Gunther and Kaufman. It's the Frankfurter clerks.
I see. Legacy, or...
being, I think, edited in chief from Washington on those biography projects.
Being persuaded / ordered.
By Felix.
But I mean, I assume these people could say no.
I think they were eager to pursue, and yes, they could have said no, but I think they were happy to do.
Now, whatever happened to the Kurland? Nothing?
He didn't do it. He didn't do it. He sent a three-word letter to Jackson's son in the mid-1970s. Dear Bill, oh fuck it, period.
Sounds very Kurland. Huh.
Bill Jackson had been after him for years. Where's the book? Where's the book? Where's the book? And Kurland finally sent him a letter that just says, oh fuck it.
So you haven't gotten one of those letters yet.
No. Nor have I sent one. Was Phil Kurland a friend of yours?
Yeah. Again, not a close friend. I know him also because the wife he married,
Was Bator's widow.
well, exactly, right.
Okay.
So
Where is she these days?
she's in Boston. She's a very good friend of my wife's.
Okay.
They grew up together in Radnor, Pennsylvania.
And what's her name?
Allie.
Allie.
I guess, I don't
She
think
uses
it's
Kurland?
Allison. Yeah, she uses Kurland. We always call her Allie. I don't think it's Allison. I think it's something else. I'm not quite sure what her proper name is. Yeah, she lives on Beacon Street in Boston.
Okay. But Kurland working on Jackson just doesn't.
Total
ring a bell.
mystery. No. Rings a negative bell.
Okay. Okay. Kurland was also working on different Frankfurter projects during this is the 60s, basically.
Uh-huh.
And for whatever reason, those took priority and Jackson never happened.
What were some of these projects?
There's a collection published by Harvard University Press, edited by Kurland, of extrajudicial writings by Frankfurter.
Huh.
I have no idea what it's called, but maybe 1970, thereabouts. It's things like eulogies and...
Well, there was a guy, Mendelssohn, Wallace Mendelssohn, who did a lot of these collections of papers by Frankfurter.
Right.
I have some of these. I didn't realize that Phil Kurland did one of them.
I think he did 2 of a projected 3 Frankfurter books, but those were editorial projects.
Uh-huh.
And his Jackson was a writing project, a biography project.
Major.
And he did it, yeah. Has Frankfurter gotten less than his due, in your view?
Well, I think he seems to be, he sort of rises and falls with the times. I think it also depends where you are, whether you're at Harvard Law School or somewhere else.
Right.
I think at Harvard Law School he's still pretty revered. I think, the whole idea of judicial restraint that Frankfurter so strongly believed in has come under considerable pressure and I think has been less followed by the courts and sometimes with very understandable reasons. I guess, didn't Frankfurter dissent in the one-man, one-vote case? Yeah. That was pretty close to before he left the court.
Yeah.
About 62 or something
Yeah,
like that.
I think Baker
In Carr, yeah.
Carr is his last. I think some actually attribute his stroke to the stress of that
Well, that's,
battle.
yeah.
But yeah, that's June of '62.
You gotta be more than a doctor to make a statement like that.
I'm not saying.
I understand. I understand.
Any other thoughts on Jackson?
No, keep up the good work.
Okay. I'm trying.
Wow.
We're trying.
I guess a couple of the people said to me this morning that this session was very interesting to them, not only because of the Brown case, but because it's one of the few occasions where people get a sense of how things work at the Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
So you might want to do something similar, more on that theme, or maybe make use of this, but not focusing it on Brown exclusively, but also on the inner workings of the Supreme Court and I guess you'd have to say in the 50s, because it might be somewhat different now. I mean, certainly decisions are given in different days, and more law clerks in the picture.
Today was such, kind of like you open up a window of a unique period of time, 1953 to 54, and we all were sitting out there peering in
Yeah.
and watching something unfold, and obviously with a theme of Brown.
Yeah, well, and that may be a good way to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, on second thought, if you just got a bunch of law clerks to interact, it might not be as productive as this was, because there was this, we were all looking at the same picture, and that's when you get discriminating differences. And I think this is an unusual group. I mean, I hadn't seen, I saw Barrett once, maybe about 20 years ago. The others I hadn't seen for 50 years, but there was a lot of respect and regard for different ways of seeing things, which I think was good. I mean, you got some of my colleagues who have more egomaniacal tendencies. This might not work out so well.
Right. Well, this was terrific. And how does Barrett look? Barrett Pridmay look now that you have seen him 20 years later? Has he changed much?
No, not really. No, I think pretty much. Now, Jack Fassett, I don't think I knew very well then, and I'm very impressed by him. I hadn't realized that he'd written this biography of Reed, and I don't think I knew, maybe because he worked for Reed, and coming back to your first question, you know, one would have more interactions with people that are in offices that you work closely with. Now, the Black, I knew Charlie Reich very well, and Frankfurter's phrase for him was "poor lamb."